My name is Eli Thompson. I used to be a firefighter. 17 years in the field, 2 medals I never wore, 1 headline I never saved. Now, I run a youth survival program out of a rented gym in Flagstaff, Arizona. No sirens, no uniforms, just kids, duct tape, and 100 ways to not die in the woods. They say I failed my family. They say I quit when things got hard. They say I ran from the fire. But none of them were there the night I walked through it. None of them saw what I carried out. Let me show you what they never asked to know. The apartment is small, the kind of place where a cough echoes. Everything smells like old wood, burnt coffee, and lemon disinfectant. I keep the lights low not for atmosphere, just to save on the bill. In the far corner, on the top shelf of a dusty bookcase, sits an old fire helmet, blackened at the edges, still stained with a streak of ash I never wiped off. I haven't touched it in years, but I haven't thrown it away either. I look at it sometimes, not to remember who I was, but to remind myself of what I walked away from. Dust collects in this apartment like regret. It builds quietly, clings to corners, refuses to move unless you force it, just like the way people talked about me after I left the department. Soft, behind my back, like dust on a jacket no one dares to clean. I'm not bitter. I'm just tired of being misunderstood. There was a time when I could sprint upstairs with 80 pounds of gear and pull a man twice my size from a hallway filled with flame. Now I walk with a slight limp. No one asks why. There was a time when strangers clapped when they heard what I did for a living. Now they ask if I still do that campfire babysitting gig. Even my father calls it that. Bonfire and backpack. That's what he calls the work I do now. Teaching teens how to make splints, purify water, escape a burning house. The kind of knowledge that keeps people alive when no one's coming to help. But they think I quit. Like courage is something you only wear when there's a uniform involved. I didn't leave the fire because I was scared. I left because one night, it nearly took everything I had left. And when I finally got out, when I finally collapsed outside that cabin, I didn't just lose my strength. I lost my place. In the department. In my family. In the story they wanted to tell about who matters and who doesn't. That's why I never talked about the grant, never mentioned the medal, never said a word about the man I carried out of that inferno unconscious, bleeding and barely breathing. Not even when the state sent me a check bigger than anything my family had ever seen. Because sometimes, silence isn't about shame. It's about survival. Last week I got a text from my mother. It said, "Miles is being honored this weekend, new title, new position. Dinner at the Bella Vita. Dress sharp." No emoji. No, hope you're well. Just the kind of message that feels more like an announcement than an invitation. I stared at it for a long time. Then I looked up at the helmet again, still covered in dust, still waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered, what if I brought the fire with me this time? Every Saturday, I unlock the back gate of the rec center at 7:15 a.m. sharp. No one else is there that early, not even the janitor. Just me, my thermos, and a folding table that's seen too many summers. I set up in the corner of the lot-stacked tarps, empty water jugs, coil ropes, a CPR dummy named Otis. I line the items up the same way every week, not because I'm obsessive, because I know what it's like when things fall apart. Order is a form of mercy. By 8 a.m., the kids start trickling in. Ages range from 10 to 17. Some come because their parents are worried. Others because they're court-ordered. A few just show up, no questions asked. I don't pry. I teach them all the same. How to check for a pulse, how to splint a wrist with duct tape and 2 sticks, how to escape a house with no power and too much smoke, how to stay calm when nobody's coming. I used to run into fire. Now I teach kids how not to light one unless they mean to. How to respect heat, not fear it, but understand it. Because the thing about fire is, it doesn't care why you're in its path. It just burns. They listen. Not always the first time, not always with good posture, but they listen. Last week, one boy asked if I'd ever seen someone die. I said yes. He didn't ask who. I didn't offer a name. He nodded like that was enough. Sometimes I think these kids understand more than most adults I know, because they've already lived through storms. Not the kind that knock down trees, the kind that knock down trust. And here I am, teaching them how to build a shelter from rope and tarp. It feels symbolic. Maybe it is. I used to think I needed the station, the badge, the uniform. Now, when I see a girl with cracked nails tie a perfect rescue knot, or a boy with bruises learn how to sterilize water using sunlight and a Ziploc bag, I remember why I'm still here. The burn scars on my arms still itch in winter. My back locks up if I sleep wrong. But none of that shows when I kneel beside a 12-year-old and hand him a compass and say, "Show me where you'd go if you were lost." Some days, it feels like I'm still pulling people out of fire. It just looks different now. Quieter. No sirens, no front-page photo. But make no mistake, this is rescue too. I don't tell them about the cabin. I don't mention the check I never cashed. They don't need a hero. They just need someone who won't leave when the smoke gets thick. And maybe that's what I needed too. This morning, as I locked up after class, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Crayon on lined paper. No name. It said, "Thank you for teaching me how not to die." I stood in the parking lot for a long time after that. Long enough for the heat to rise off the pavement and settle into my chest. Not a flame, but something close. The message came on a Wednesday. Short. Cold. "Miles is being honored this weekend. Dinner at Bella Vita. Dress appropriately." No hello. No, hope to see you. Just instructions, like I was a hired seat filler. I stared at the screen for a while, not reading the words, just letting them sit there like smoke trapped behind glass. Bella Vita. I looked it up. Upscale Italian. Chandeliers shaped like ice drops. Menus without prices. The kind of place where people wear quiet shoes and louder egos. I hadn't seen Miles in over a year. The last time, he dropped off a holiday card and didn't come inside. Said he was late for rounds. Didn't ask how I was healing. Didn't even make eye contact when he handed me the envelope. It was blank inside. Just a printed photo of him in scrubs, smiling, confident, polished like glass. Still, I opened the drawer and pulled out my only decent shirt, held it up to the light, checked for creases. Then I folded it back down and walked away. Didn't say yes, didn't say no. Just let the invite hang in the air like a question I didn't owe an answer to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I don't get flashbacks the way movies show them. No screaming, no shaky camera in my mind. Just flashes, sounds, a smell, and sometimes a face. This time, it was my father's. Hospital room, white sheets. Burn cream, sharp in my nostrils. I had just woken up from the 3rd surgery. My skin felt like parchment soaked in salt. He stood at the doorway. Didn't come in. Didn't speak. Just looked at me like I was someone else's kid. Like the person lying there, half wrapped in gauze, eyes yellow from meds, couldn't possibly be his son. Then his phone rang, and he answered it. Still staring at me. He said, Yeah, we're here now. He's stable. No, not sure what he'll be able to do after this. Do. Not be. Not recover from. Just do. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. That was easier than pretending I didn't hear him. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the invite again. Not because I wanted to go, but because something in me wanted to stop running. There's a difference between walking away and disappearing. I had done the latter for too long. Let them build a version of me that was easier to ignore. Maybe it was time to let them see what was left. Not the fireman, not the failure. Just me. The next morning, I took my boots to get resoled. They were the only thing I still owned from my firefighter days that wasn't burned or buried in a box. I paid in cash. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions. He just handed me a ticket and said, "You bring something back to life. You treat it with respect." Maybe that's all I wanted. Not revenge, not pity, just a chance to step back into the room and not feel like I was a ghost. And so, for the first time in a decade, I said yes to something that had my brother's name on it. Even if it came wrapped in silence, even if it still smelled like smoke. The parking lot smelled like valet grease and Italian herbs. Inside, the chandeliers flickered like polished icicles, and every table had a tiny flame floating in a bowl of water, as if fire needed taming just to be acceptable here. Bella vita. Of course. A hostess in black silk checked her clipboard. "Thompson? You're with the Carter-Thompson party. They're already seated." She didn't wait for a reply, just turned and led me through a maze of soft jazz and expensive perfumes. There were about 30 of them. Family, colleagues, distant relatives, dragged in for the occasion. Miles stood at the center, wearing a slate gray suit and that perfect conference smile he'd mastered over the years. He looked like a man who had never doubted himself, not even once. The moment my presence registered, there was a subtle pause, a tightening of shoulders, a flicker of surprise in the eyes of my uncle. My mother didn't smile. She just nodded, like I was the person she hadn't expected, but felt obligated to acknowledge. "Eli, over here," she said, touching my arm without really touching it. She gestured toward a seat at the far end of the long table wedged between Cousin Diane and some finance guy I didn't recognize. No one offered to move. No one made space closer to the center. I was furniture, an afterthought, a +1 to my own bloodline. Diane leaned over. "Hey, wow, long time. Are you still doing that camp thing?" I nodded. "Still helping kids stay alive." She laughed softly, as if I'd made a joke I hadn't meant to. The man on my right was already scrolling his phone. I watched as champagne was poured for everyone except the edges of the table. That was reserved for the VIP zone, where Miles stood, fielding compliments, shaking hands like a senator on election night. My father raised a toast. "To Miles, our pride, our hope, our future, Dr. Chief." Everyone clapped, some a little too hard. I took a sip of water. Mom leaned over again during appetizers. "Please don't say anything." "Intense tonight, Eli." Her voice was low, even. "This is Miles's evening." I nodded without blinking. That was always the rule. Speak softly. Don't overshadow. Don't interrupt the narrative we've all agreed to pretend is real. The salad arrived arugula. Beets. Goat cheese I wouldn't touch. The conversation floated above me like balloons on strings too high to reach. Someone joked about the fire Miles had for medicine. I looked at the floating flame on the table, flickering in its glass bowl. I could still feel heat in my left shoulder, the one with the skin graft. It tingled sometimes when I was near real fire. But not this kind. Not the kind you can blow out with 2 fingers. I looked around the table and realized I was surrounded by people who had rehearsed every word of tonight, except mine, because no one ever asked for my version of the story until tonight, and they wouldn't like what it sounded like when told in my voice, with no edits, no applause, and no need for their permission. The moment was small at first, a shift in conversation, a pause and a laugh, the clink of a fork stopping mid-air. I didn't notice him right away. Dr. Curtis Lane standing near the wine bar, chatting with Miles's department head. He looked older than the last time I saw him, which makes sense. He'd been unconscious, half burned, and barely breathing back then. His hair was silver now, thinner, but the posture, that quiet, learned confidence of someone who'd earned their authority the hard way, still held. He turned slightly. His eyes swept the room casually, politely, then landed on me, and froze. Not for a second. Not in confusion, but like he had just seen something he wasn't sure could be real. He took a step forward. I stayed seated. "Excuse me," he said, softly at first, then a bit louder. He walked past the host, past the conversations, straight toward my end of the table. "You," he pointed slowly. "Wait, were you there? Lake Ridge, cabin fire, October 2016. The room went quiet. Conversations broke off. Chairs stopped squeaking. Even the jazz in the background felt like it faded out. I didn't move, didn't blink. He stepped closer. "You had a mask, burned sleeve. You yelled at me to stay awake." He was piecing it together aloud. "You dragged me out. The door had collapsed. You crawled under the beam and—" Miles stood up halfway, smiling awkwardly, like trying to redirect a spotlight with his bare hands. "Dr. Lane, this is my brother, Eli. He used to—" Lane didn't let him finish. "He saved my life." A single sentence, not loud, but it echoed like a dropped glass in the middle of a church. "He pulled me out of the fire, carried me 20 feet past the perimeter, then out from heat stroke and blood loss." People began turning. Even the servers stopped walking. I could feel Miles staring at me like I'd just stabbed him with a dessert fork. Lane turned back to the table, still speaking. "I tried for years to find out who it was. The report said, unidentified rescuer. But now I know. It was him." He pointed again. Me. My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father leaned back like someone had just changed the gravity in the room. Lane looked down, his voice suddenly quiet again. "They gave someone a check for that. A citation. Heroism fund. I never found out who. Until now. I didn't respond. Didn't stand. Didn't perform. I just looked at Lane and nodded. Because what do you say when the truth walks into a room on its own 2 feet and does the job you were too tired to keep doing? Miles sat down slowly. His face looked hollow. Not angry, not confused. Just cracked like something he thought would never be questioned had just started to crumble. I took a sip of water, set the glass down, and in that stillness, for the first time all night, I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't stay for dessert, didn't wait for the awkward hugs or the half-hearted, "we should catch up sometime" small talk. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked out of Bella Vita without looking back. The air outside hit like a second wind. Cool. Dry. Honest. Not like the filtered luxury inside, where even the silence was curated. I crossed the parking lot slowly, not because I was tired, though I was, but because something inside me had started to move. Not rage, not pride. Something older, something hotter. A flicker. I didn't say anything to Miles. Didn't wait for my mother to catch up and whisper excuses. Didn't explain to anyone how many times I'd practiced silence as a form of self-preservation. Tonight, I didn't have to defend myself. The truth had done it for me, but that didn't mean it was over. If anything, it was just beginning. I sat in my truck with the engine off, windows cracked. Let the night breathe in. Let the echo of Dr. Lane's voice settle somewhere between my ribs. He saved my life. Funny how 5 words can rearrange a family's entire understanding of you. It had been years since anyone said my name without attaching it to disappointment. Eli, the dropout. Eli, the quitter. Eli, who teaches campfire stuff. No one asked what it took to pull a full-grown man out of a burning building with one functioning arm and smoke in your lungs. No one asked how long it takes to learn how to hold a pen again when your fingers don't close the way they used to. But suddenly, one voice in one room brought it all back. Not the pain, the proof. The scar under my collarbone prickled. That one always did when the temperature dropped, or when something unspoken rose too close to the surface. I remembered the first time I looked at it in the mirror after the bandages came off. Red. Warped. Ugly. I remember thinking, this is what it costs to matter. But tonight, as I ran my fingers lightly over the fabric of my shirt, I realized something I hadn't admitted before. That scar didn't just come from fire. It came from being left behind afterward. The worst burns aren't the ones on your skin. They're the ones nobody sees. The ones that get mistaken for personality flaws instead of survival. As I sat there, I felt it. The weight I'd carried all these years wasn't just grief, it was restraint. And now, something in me had shifted. Not enough to yell, not enough to gloat, just enough to rise. A memory flashed. Me, crawling through the cabin, floor half gone, roof groaning, the man in my arms barely conscious. The fear. The adrenaline, the absolute clarity. And now, here I was again, not in a fire, but still surrounded by smoke. I put the keys in the ignition. The engine turned over smooth, familiar. And as I drove home, I thought, let them sit in that room with their questions. Let them turn over every time they ignored me, minimized me, redefined me. Because the silence I'd wrapped myself in for years was starting to fray, and underneath it, the heat was still there. The calls started around 9:30 that night. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a pocket dial, a wrong number. But then the second one came, then the third. By midnight, I had 11 missed calls, 4 voicemails, 2 text messages that just said, "Hey, we're proud of you," followed by, "You still have that money, right?" I didn't answer any of them. The first voicemail was from Aunt Clara. She hadn't called in years, not since I skipped Thanksgiving. Her voice was syrupy sweet, almost motherly. "Eli, honey, I saw the photos from the dinner. Just, wow. We're all so amazed. Truly. What you did was incredible. Oh, and listen. Michael's thinking about starting his own security company. Maybe there's a way we could partner with that fund you got." Click. The second was from my cousin Jonah. He used to steal my lunch in middle school. "Yo, Eli. Man, I had no idea you were a real-life hero. That's sick. Anyway, listen, I'm building this non-profit for underserved youth, right? Just need a little seed money to get it off the ground. You feel me?" Click. I didn't feel him. I didn't feel any of them. The worst was a text from my uncle. No greeting. Just, "Heard you got $200K from the state. That true? Let me know. Got something urgent. Can't explain over text." Suddenly, Everyone wanted to reconnect. Suddenly, I wasn't the black sheep. I was a potential investor. Funny how money has a way of bringing people closer, closer than blood ever did. I turned off my phone and dropped it in the drawer. Sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. Let the quiet stretch around me like a bruise. The helmet in the corner seemed to stare at me. Still there. Still untouched. But now it felt different. Like it had waited for this moment. Like it knew the difference between applause and real acknowledgement. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't ask to be known. But I also didn't ask to be forgotten until I was valuable again. I walked into the kitchen, poured water into the kettle. My hands shook a little old habit, not emotion. Or maybe it was both. As the water began to boil, I stared at the window. Outside, the desert stretched quiet and open. No lights, no judgment. Just night, and breath, and space. I remembered the moment I got the check from the state. Months after the fire. No ceremony, no handshake. Just a manila envelope with a name spelled wrong and a number that made me sick. I didn't spend a dime. Not because I was noble, but because I didn't know who I'd be without the struggle. Now, they were crawling out of the woodwork. Every person who'd ever laughed when I said I taught survival. Every relative who called my job a hobby. And all they wanted to know was, do I still have the money? Not, are you okay? Not, do you sleep through the night? Not, how's the shoulder? Just what's left to take. I poured the tea, sat back in the dark, and let the first bitter sip burn down slow. Some fires come from within, and this time, I wasn't putting it out. The phone rang again the next evening. This time, I knew the number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Not because I didn't expect it, but because I did. Miles, I said. He didn't waste time. Eli, hey, listen, I know it's late. I wouldn't be calling if it weren't serious. His voice was tight, polished, but cracked in the places he couldn't control. I need your help. I stayed silent. I messed up. I've got some debt. I thought I could manage it, but things snowballed. I need 40, maybe 50, just to stabilize. 50. Like it was a bag of sugar, not a year of my rent. He added quickly, it's temporary. I'll pay it back. I'm applying for the neurology fellowship this fall. Big stipend. I'll make it right. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the old tile cool against my palm, the hum of the refrigerator louder than his voice. Why me? I asked. A pause. Because you're my brother. Funny how that word always resurfaces when it's convenient. I didn't say anything. So he filled the silence. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I've always respected what you do. I mean, fireman. That's insane. You saved lives, and now you're teaching kids how to survive. That's huge. It almost sounded sincere. Almost. But sincerity doesn't wait until the bank account's empty. You called me a dropout at Christmas 2 years ago, I said quietly. You told your friends I ran away from responsibility. That was a joke. I didn't mean it. Miles, you laughed when Mom said I teach marshmallow roasting for a living. You never corrected her. He went quiet. I closed my eyes, and just for a second I remembered. We were 9 and 14, camping in the backyard. We had 2 cookies left between us, and Miles broke the last one in half. Gave me the bigger piece. Said, firefighters need more energy. That night, I let him zip up my sleeping bag because my fingers were cold. He whispered, when I grow up, I want to be brave like you. That version of him was long gone, replaced by someone who wore success like a mask and used guilt like currency. You're asking me to give you part of a reward I never even talked about, I said. A reward I earned when my skin was peeling and my lungs felt like wet cloth. He exhaled. Sharp. Tense. Eli, I'm desperate. I'm not asking for a handout, just a loan, please. I let the silence stretch. Then I said the one thing I knew would hurt more than a no. If I was just your broke brother running summer camps, would you still be calling? More silence. Longer this time. No, he admitted. And there it was. The truth. Clean. Ugly. Necessary. I can't help you, Miles. Click. I set the phone down. No drama. No speech. Just the quiet satisfaction of choosing peace over obligation. And somewhere in that silence I realized, you don't owe your past anything, if it keeps trying to bankrupt your future. After I hung up, I didn't move, didn't pace, didn't curse. I just sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the drawer I hadn't opened in years, the one beneath the chipped counter, behind the box of spare batteries and broken pens, where I kept the envelope. It was still there, thick, heavy with the kind of weight no one talks about. The paper yellowed slightly at the edges, the seal unbroken. I pulled it out slowly, like it might disappear if I moved too fast, set it on the table in front of me. Didn't open it, just looked at it. Most people would have cashed it right away. Bought a car, a house, something that said, I made it. I didn't, not because I didn't need it, but because it felt sacred, like proof that I hadn't imagined it, that the pain, the fire, the surgeries, none of it was just some ghost story I told myself when things got quiet. When they mailed me that check, there was no ceremony, no handshake, no photo op, just a letter from the state of Colorado, in recognition of exceptional bravery in the line of duty. No one from my family mentioned it. I never brought it up. Maybe because part of me hoped they'd ask. But they didn't. That envelope became my monument. Not to heroism, to survival. It sat there through every birthday call they forgot, every email thread I wasn't copied on, every time my job got described with air quotes and eye rolls. When people say money changes things, they're usually talking about people who spend it. But sometimes, what changes you is holding on to it. Because this money wasn't payment. It was acknowledgement. It was the state saying, we saw what you did, even if no one else did. And if I spent it, if I let it go, what would I have left? Just scars. Just silence. And now here I was, being asked to give a piece of it away. To someone who only saw its value when he needed it. To someone who once told me firefighting was a blue-collar gamble. I ran my fingers across the seal. It felt smooth, untouched, like a part of me I had protected all this time. I could hear Miles's voice echoing in my head. You're my brother. Yeah, and for years I tried to live up to that. Tried to be there. Tried to earn my place, even if they never saw me. But family, real family, they don't remember you only when the numbers start with a dollar sign. I slid the envelope back into the drawer, closed it gently. No slam, no finality, just clarity. There are some things more valuable than money, like knowing your worth without needing it validated, like being whole without anyone else's permission, like finally understanding that keeping something untouched isn't always about fear. Sometimes it's about respect. And tonight, I chose to respect what it cost me to survive. It started like most fires do. Quiet, contained, hidden behind a wall until it's too big to ignore. The Reddit post went live sometime Monday morning. I found out because someone from my old station forwarded me the link with a single line. This you? I clicked it. The title read, My brother used to be a firefighter, Now he hoards $200K while our family falls apart. No username I recognized, no photos, just a long, well-constructed narrative about how I'd abandoned my family in a time of crisis, how I was emotionally cold, how I was clinging to trauma to justify selfishness. The kicker was the closing sentence. Heroes don't cash checks for saving lives, then refuse to save the people who matter most. I didn't comment, didn't share, didn't even text Miles because I didn't need to. It had his fingerprints all over it. The phrasing, the cadence, the way it was just polished enough to feel believable, just vague enough to avoid legal trouble. By lunchtime, it had 6,000 upvotes, comments piling up like kindling. Firefighters are supposed to be selfless. Sounds like classic narcissism. Bet he made up half the story for sympathy. I closed the browser, shut my laptop, walked out the door. Sometimes, when it burns too fast, you don't try to put it out. You just step outside and breathe something else. I went to the grocery store, a small one, the kind where you know the guy behind the meat counter and the cashier wears the same apron every day. But this time, it felt different. The woman in front of me at the produce section glanced over, then looked away too fast. The guy stacking cucumbers didn't say hi like he usually did. Even the cashier, Maya, who once asked me to teach her nephew how to tie a splint, smiled a little too tightly. As she rang up my milk and granola, she asked, "Everything good, Mr. Thompson?" Her tone was careful. Too careful. I nodded. "Everything's fine." She hesitated before handing me the receipt. Not because she forgot, because she was deciding whether or not to say what she was thinking. She didn't. But I knew. It's strange how fast public opinion moves. One day you're a hero with a melted helmet. The next, you're just another guy with money and a story that people don't want to believe anymore. And the worst part? It wasn't even anger I felt. It was erosion. Like something inside me was slowly being worn down. Not by hate, but by the absence of benefit of the doubt. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark. Back to the door. Phone on silent. Trying to find where my breathing started and the noise ended. Outside, the neighborhood was calm. Kids on bikes. Dogs barking behind fences. Nothing out of place. But inside, I could feel it. A new kind of fire. Not the kind you fight with water. The kind you fight with truth. By Friday, the phone calls stopped. Not because things had settled. Because the damage had already been done. I walked into the training center that morning and felt the difference immediately. The air was still. Too still. Usually there'd be noise. Sneakers scuffing the mat. Kids laughing, arguing, testing limits. But that day, the mats were rolled up. The cabinets locked. The class list cut in half. Sandra, the front desk coordinator, met me at the door. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes did the work for her. "They're pulling out?" I asked. She nodded. 4 parents called last night. 2 more this morning. They don't want their kids learning from someone they can't trust. She didn't add the rest, but I heard it anyway. From someone they think is selfish, a fraud, a man who got paid for being a hero and now can't be bothered to help his own family. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. The post had done what it was meant to do. No one cared to ask from my side. No one even asked if the money had ever been spent. In their minds, I was already guilty, convicted by keyboard and echo chamber. I walked into the main room, sat down on the edge of the practice mat. The same mat where I once taught a kid how to treat a sprained ankle with just a t-shirt and a stick. He'd hugged me after. Said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." That kid was gone now. His mom sent a letter. Not an email. A handwritten letter folded in a blue envelope and taped to the door. It said, "We trusted you. My son looked up to you. I can't believe I let him call you a role model. We won't be returning." No name, no signature, just hurt, weaponized by assumption. I held the letter for a while, ran my thumb along the edges, then folded it, placed it under the table, and sat in silence. It's one thing to be insulted by strangers. It's another to be erased by people who once clapped for you. Sandra sat beside me eventually. "This isn't the end," she said. "I've seen kids walk out on worse and come back." I nodded, but said nothing. Because the worst part wasn't the empty room. It was how familiar it all felt. I'd lived this before, in a different uniform, with different silence. After the cabin fire, when no one came to the hospital, when the department sent a card and a badge in a box instead of a goodbye. Back then, I told myself that was just how life worked. That maybe people forget the things that don't make headlines. That maybe you couldn't ask to be remembered and invisible. But now, I knew better. They hadn't forgotten. They just preferred the version of me that stayed quiet. The one they could point to and say, "Look at what he used to be." Now that I was standing again, still burned, still breathing, they didn't know what to do with me. And maybe that was the real crime in their eyes, that I didn't stay down. I got home late that night, didn't notice anything wrong at first. The door was locked. The hallway was quiet. My neighbor's TV was humming through the wall, just like always. But when I stepped inside, something felt off. It wasn't the mess. I don't live neat, but I know where things are. This wasn't disorganized. It was disturbed. The drawer where I kept the envelope was open. Just slightly. Not yanked out, not rifled through like in the movies. Just open enough to be intentional. The safe under my bed had been moved. Not broken, not forced. Just tampered with. The latch was off by a centimeter, like someone had tried and failed to open it, or maybe hadn't needed to. I knelt down slowly, opened it. Some files were gone. Not the check that was still there, untouched, but a few documents I kept with it. The citation letter from the state, a copy of the fire department's incident report, my last official fitness for duty evaluation, the one that said, "Permanent nerve damage unfit for active rescue." All gone. And then I saw it, tucked into the back corner of the safe. A note, folded once. No envelope, no signature. I opened it. If you don't know how to share, someone else will do it for you. My hand stayed steady, not because I wasn't shaken, because I was past shaken. This was something else, a familiar chill, the kind I used to feel when the radio went silent during a call, when the smoke got too thick and the mask fogged, and suddenly, you weren't sure which way was out. Except this time, the fire wasn't out there. It was in my home, my space, my story. I checked the windows locked. No sign of forced entry. No broken glass. No footprint in the dust. Just absence. Whoever it was, they knew what they were looking for. And they knew I wouldn't report it. Not yet. Because that's what guilt does. It makes you hesitate, even when you're the one being hunted. I sat on the edge of my bed, the note still in my hand. There was a time when I thought danger had a sound sirens, screams, explosions. Now I know better. Real danger whispers. It creeps. It wears your last name and your family's perfume. It knocks on your door pretending to be concerned and walks out with pieces of your past. I didn't cry, didn't curse, just folded the note back up, put it in a new envelope, and placed it inside the safe, next to the check, the badge, and whatever faith I had left in keeping things private. Because the truth is, once someone decides you owe them something, they'll rewrite every chapter of your life to make it fit their narrative. And if you stay quiet long enough, they'll convince everyone else it was theirs to begin with. But I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Not this time. Not while someone was trying to take the last thing I hadn't already given away. I'm not easily rattled. 17 years in fire rescue teaches you how to breathe through chaos. I've walked through burning stairwells with half the ceiling falling on my shoulders, and I still made it out calm. But that morning, standing just inside my apartment, I didn't feel calm. I felt studied. The door was locked when I got home. Nothing broken. No scratches on the knob. No signs of forced entry. But something was wrong. It started with the floor. Right past the welcome mat, barely visible in the morning light, was a footprint. Just one. Damp. Shaped like a small bare foot, maybe size 9. It trailed toward the kitchen, then disappeared. My body tensed. Not fear. Not yet. But the kind of awareness that creeps in when you realize you're not alone, even when the room is empty. I moved to the bedroom. That's when I saw the safe. It was subtle, but I noticed. The corner edge was out of line with the floorboard shifted maybe 2 inches from where I always kept it. I don't have much in there, but I know how I left it. I dropped to one knee. The safe wasn't damaged, no visible signs of tampering, but the latch was loose, not open, just adjusted. Like someone had opened it, then closed it gently enough to pretend it hadn't been touched. I unlocked it. The check was still there. The medal, the burned patch of my old uniform. But the papers, 3 of them, were missing. The incident report from the Bridger fire, my medical discharge evaluation, and a signed letter from the state confirming the commendation. Gone. That wasn't random. That was surgical. Someone didn't want the money. They wanted to erase the proof of what happened, the trail that tied me to what I survived. I backed away slowly, eyes scanning the room. That's when I saw it on the table by the window, a paper coffee cup, still warm, half drunk. Not mine. Vanilla sweet cream. The exact kind Miles always drank. My stomach dropped. This wasn't desperation anymore. It was strategy. Someone had walked into my home, without force, without fear, and hand-picked what to take. And they'd left just enough behind to let me know. I was being watched. It wasn't about the money. It was about the story. And someone was rewriting it, without me in it. Her name came to me while I was still staring at the footprint. Janice Mallory. 12 years ago, she was just another nervous high school senior in one of my weekend first aid workshops. She had a purple notebook filled with highlighted notes, color-coded tabs, and drawings of splints and CPR hand placement. She was the kind of kid you remember not for her questions, but for how seriously she listened. 3 years later, I pulled her out of a flipped SUV off I-35. I was driving home from a training when I saw the wreck. A truck had slammed into the passenger side of her sedan, pinning it against a concrete divider. I didn't think. I just reacted, crawled in through the shattered rear window, used a jacket to keep pressure on her leg wound, and stayed with her until paramedics arrived. She sent me a thank you letter a month later, neatly written. No exaggeration, just gratitude. Now I was the one bleeding, just not visibly. I still had her number. Don't ask me why. Maybe I always knew I'd need help from someone who remembered who I used to be. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Eli? Her voice hadn't changed. It's calm, alert, like a cop who never quite lets her guard down. I need your help, I said. Silence for a beat. Then, talk to me. I told her everything, quietly, carefully, my missing documents, the staged intrusion, the coffee cup. I didn't even have to say Miles's name. She got it. I'm coming by tonight, she said. You don't touch anything. True to her word, Janice showed up just past 9. Off duty, but still in uniform pants and a zip-up jacket with the detective's badge clipped to her hip. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She scanned the place like she was building a map in her head. She crouched beside the safe, ran a gloved finger along the floor. Clean, she muttered. Too clean. She sniffed the coffee cup. Vanilla sweet cream. That his? I nodded. She jotted something down, then looked at me for the first time. Eli, this wasn't just intimidation. This was a surgical leak. He wants something, but he also wants you unsteady. You're more valuable to him confused than cornered. Then she reached into her satchel and handed me a manila envelope. I pulled something for you, quietly, no digital trail. Inside were surveillance stills. A man in a hoodie entering my building at 3:42 a.m. using a keycard that didn't belong to any current tenant. Another shot, the man shaking hands with someone in a silver sedan. Miles. My heart tightened. He sold you out, Eli. Now the question is, what are you going to do with that? I didn't answer. Not yet. But for the first time since the night of the gala, I didn't feel alone. I had firepower of a different kind now, and I was going to use it. I used to believe betrayal was a single moment, a sharp word, a door slammed, a check that never came. But real betrayal is slower, quieter. It leaks through cracks like smoke until you're choking and don't know why. Janice didn't say much after handing me the photos. She just opened her laptop, pulled up a tracking program, and began typing. Let's start simple, she said. Reddit post went viral within 4 hours. Too fast for organic growth. That means someone seeded it, pushed it through forums, group chats, maybe even mailers. I sat beside her, watching the glow from her screen dance on her face. Post was made using a masked account, she continued. But not masked enough. Got an IP trace, not exact location, but guess where it pings? I didn't answer. She turned the screen toward me. Houston Medical Complex. Administration Network. Miles, I said under my breath. She nodded. But here's the kicker. She opened a screenshot of the Reddit post's draft history. You see that typo? Unreconcilable. Miles uses it all the time. I checked his old med school submissions. It's not a common error, but it's his. She clicked again. Then came the email logs retrieved through a back door, thanks to Janice's friend who owed her a favor. Dozens of messages between Miles and a burner Gmail account labeled Civic Health Grants, the fake foundation he'd invented. She highlighted one in particular. Once the Reddit traffic holds, I'll push the cousin to ask again. If Eli doesn't crack, we still have the sympathy card for Mom's church. That'll get us 5 figures easy. My throat went dry. He wasn't just hoping I'd help. He was planning for me not to, and profiting either way. Janice leaned back in her chair. He's not desperate. He's strategic. He's playing the long game, and you're just one of his pieces. I didn't reply. Instead, my eyes drifted to the edge of her desk, to her own white keyboard. Clean. Organized. Letters. Barely worn. And I thought about the keyboard in Miles's home office. Letters faded from overuse, especially the R and E. He used them to search research grants, rehab programs, redemption stories. He wasn't just writing lies. He was writing scripts for all of us. Except now, I was holding the pen too, and I had something he didn't. The truth. There's a moment right before a fire catches. when the air goes still. That kind of stillness hit me the next morning. Not peace, just pressure, like something was waiting to ignite. I stared at my phone. 37 unread messages, 7 voicemails, 2 anonymous emails with subject lines like, "Think about what you're doing," all sent between 2 and 5 a.m. They weren't trying to reason with me anymore. They were trying to rattle me. But that's the funny thing about pressure. If you survive enough of it, you stop mistaking it for fear. I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it Miles, Insurance. Janice gave me a list of what I'd need: metadata, chain of custody, signed statements if possible. Nothing sloppy, everything legal. This wasn't revenge, it was preparation. I dug through old texts, found the one where Miles asked for just a small favor, right after the gala. Harmless on its own, chilling when read after the Reddit post. Then I opened a voice recorder and hit play on the voicemail he left 3 nights ago. His tone too rehearsed, too clean. If this hits the press, we both lose. Don't be stubborn, Eli. You don't want to make enemies you can't see coming. I played it twice. The second time, I wrote down every pause. Even silence says something. I printed out the photos from Janice's folder, labeled each, logged the time and location. Then I uploaded everything to a cloud drive, password protected, 2-factor authentication, sent to a lawyer friend I hadn't talked to in years. I wasn't just preparing for court. I was preparing for war. Quiet, deliberate war. And the more they pushed me to be quiet, the more I knew I had to keep going, because silence only helps the ones who built the lie. It's not a virtue, it's a weapon, and I wasn't going to hand it to them anymore. They called it a family meeting. No subject line, just a group text from my mother. "We all need to talk. Please come. It's important." I showed up because part of me still hoped that meant something. The living room had been rearranged like some kind of suburban tribunal. Every dining chair, ottoman, and stool pulled into a wide circle 12 seats. The 13th was already occupied. A man in a slate gray blazer, polished shoes, carrying a leather folio with brass corners. "Eli," my father said without meeting my eyes. "This is Tom. He's advising." The air in the room went tight. That word advising tastes different when you're the only one who didn't know he was invited. Mom patted the seat beside her, face soft with rehearsed sorrow. "I made your favorite tea." I sat, but didn't touch the cup. Miles leaned forward. His hair was still perfect. His tie just a little loose, like he was trying to say, "See, I'm human too." "Eli," he said, voice all concern. "I messed up. I've got some bad people after me, and if this hits the board at the hospital," he swallowed, "I'll lose everything. I know I've been selfish, but I swear, I'm trying to fix it." That's when Mom broke, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Your brother needs help. We're not asking you to give everything, just some. You're the only one who can." Dad stayed silent, as usual, staring at the worn edge of the coffee table like it held the answers he didn't want to say out loud. Tom, the lawyer, cleared his throat, trying to keep things civil. "We've drafted a short agreement," he said, "just to formalize the gift, prevent tax complications, protect both parties. Standard language." Gift. That word again. Like the time, the trauma, the silence, the public shame, were all just wrapping paper for a signature. I looked at them, at every face in that circle. People I'd once thought were mine. People who'd turned my absence into a punchline. Then I spoke, calm and measured. "You didn't invite me here to talk. You invited me here to transfer ownership of money, of truth, of silence." Miles started to object. I raised a hand. "One condition," I said. If I agree to anything, even a cent Miles goes to rehab. Not a week. A certified 60-day program. No substitutions. And, I added, turning to the rest, none of you ever speak about the grant again. Not at dinner. Not in whispers. Not in your sleep. It's off limits. The room shifted, a mix of relief and resentment, as if they were grateful for the olive branch, but angry it wasn't a full surrender. Miles nodded too fast. Of course, man, whatever it takes. I didn't smile, didn't blink, because this wasn't peace. It was a contract with ghosts. The courtroom wasn't crowded. No media frenzy, no flashing cameras, just rows of stiff benches and the kind of humming silence that makes your skin itch. I didn't bring anyone with me. No friend for support. No one from the center. Just a binder in my hand and my back straight as a flagpole. Miles sat at the defense table, suit pressed, eyes darkened with sleepless nights, or regret. Hard to say which. Regret tends to look like everything else when it's faked. Our parents were in the second row. Mom clutched a tissue like it held the verdict. Dad stared at the floor again. When the judge asked if I had anything to submit, I stepped forward. Calm, measured, no drama, just facts. IP logs, metadata, voicemail transcripts, the photo of Miles letting someone into my apartment complex late at night. The jury didn't need time to warm up. Each piece of evidence stacked on the last like bricks in a chimney. No one raised their voice. No one objected. The quiet was the loudest thing in the room. Even when the prosecutor played the voicemail from Miles, his words echoing through the speakers. If this hits the press, we both lose. He didn't flinch. Maybe he thought staying still made him look strong. To me, it looked like surrender. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood. My brother didn't just try to steal money. He tried to erase the only thing I had left of that fire, my name. And he did it behind a mask of family. I glanced at Miles. He didn't meet my eyes. I didn't ask for applause when I pulled people out of flames. I'm not asking for it now. All I want is the truth to matter again. That was it. No speech, no heroics. Just a quiet flame, steady and unshaking. The judge read the sentence without emotion. Full restitution of stolen funds, mandatory psychological treatment, 2-year suspension from medical practice, a permanent mark on his license. I didn't smile, didn't clench my fists in triumph. I just stood there, shoulders relaxed, spine straight. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about the difference between silence and justice, and for the first time in years, the silence wasn't mine to carry. The judge asked if I had any final words. I didn't rise right away. I looked down at my hand steady now, not trembling. No soot on the fingers, just skin that had healed. Mostly. Then I stood. My voice didn't rise. I didn't shout. I didn't perform. I just spoke like someone who'd lived every word. When I was a firefighter, we were trained to move toward danger. While everyone else ran out, we ran in. You don't think. You don't hesitate. You just act. Because somebody's life depends on it. I glanced at the jury, then at Miles, still avoiding my eyes. There was a day I carried a man out of a burning house. His ribs were broken. Mine were too. I didn't know his name. I just knew he needed someone to stay, so I stayed. I pulled him out. I passed out before the front porch hit my knees. A pause. That moment became my legacy, but not for the people closest to me. My gaze moved to my mother, her hands twisted in her lap now. Dad sat motionless, eyes fixed on some invisible point between us. See, it's not the fire that scars you. It's what comes after. The silence, the forgetting, the way people pretend not to see you because your story doesn't fit their version of success. I turned back to the bench. My brother didn't just take money. He tried to take that story, my story, and rewrite it in his favor. But this time, I didn't run into the flames for someone else. I stayed in them long enough to pull myself out. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I let the stillness speak for me. Then I said the last line I'd written the night before, under the dim light of my kitchen, next to the fireproof box that had held my uncashed check for years. Your Honor, I'm not asking you to punish him for what he did to me. I'm asking you to protect the space I finally built for myself. A long breath. Then I sat. The courtroom stayed quiet, not because they didn't care, but because the truth, when spoken plainly, doesn't need volume to echo. I never thought I'd see my name on a building again. Certainly not like this. A simple sign hung over the entrance. Painted metal, nothing flashy. Just 3 words: the Ashline Project. I chose the name for a reason. Ash is what remains when everything else is burned away. But in the right hands, even ash can nourish something new. The building was an old rec center on the east side of town. Dr. Everett Lane helped secure the space, quietly, generously, and without ceremony. The man I once dragged out of a fire now handed me the keys to start one of my own. He didn't say much, just placed a folder in my hand and said, "This time, let the fire be yours." The grant was enough to get us started. Used gear, a few part-time instructors, a closet full of sleeping bags and field kits. The walls still smelled faintly of dust and old gym shoes, but I didn't mind. By week 3, we had 10 kids signed up, mostly teens from foster care, group homes, or nowhere in particular. Not a single one of them had ever lit a campfire. Most had never been trusted with a knife, let alone taught how to sharpen one. The first to walk through the door was a girl named Shay. 14, eyes like someone who'd already seen too much. She didn't smile, just scanned the room, found the farthest chair from everyone else, and sat down without a word. She reminded me of someone. Me, maybe, or someone I tried to be once. That day, I started the first lesson with something simple: how to find north without a compass. A few of them rolled their eyes. One boy asked if he could just Google it, but I pressed on. I told them, when the world feels like it's spinning, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is know where you stand. We practiced setting up tents in silence, then learning knots, fire building, and basic first aid. Some failed fast, others pretended not to care. Shay didn't speak until day 4. She approached me after class and asked, "Do people really pass out in fires? Like, instantly?" I looked at her. You'd be surprised what the body does to protect itself. Sometimes it shuts down so your mind won't have to remember. She didn't respond, just nodded and walked away. That night, I stayed late at the center, reorganizing the supply shelves. My hand brushed the side of a cracked helmet we used for demos. I turned it over. Inside was a faint signature one of the kids had written it during the second day, to the guy who didn't quit. I didn't know who wrote it, didn't need to, because that's what the Ashline Project was for, not for kids to become firefighters, but for them to find something still burning in themselves when the rest of the world had gone cold. And maybe, just maybe, to remind me that starting over doesn't mean starting from nothing. It means starting from truth. It was near the end of a long Tuesday. The kids had just finished practicing how to purify water with charcoal and sunlight. Some of them actually seemed proud of themselves, which, honestly, is harder to teach than any survival skill. I was locking up the supply closet when I heard soft footsteps behind me. It was Mateo, 8 years old, quiet, sharp-eyed, always scribbling something in the corners of his notebook when he thought no one was watching. He held his water bottle like it was something sacred, both hands gripping it tight. I smiled, thinking he'd come to ask about iodine tablets again. But instead, he said, "Can I ask something personal, Mr. Dodger? Dear Eli?" I turned fully, crouched to his level. "Always." He didn't look up right away. Then, after a pause so long it felt like a held breath, he asked, "If I was your brother, would you help me too?" The room went quiet in my ears. Everything around me, the drip of a faucet, the clink of metal chairs muffled into silence. I felt it in my chest first. Not pain, not guilt, just weight. This boy, barely tall enough to reach the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, had just laid bare the question I had been avoiding for months. Would I have helped my brother? If I loved him? I didn't answer right away, because the truth wasn't a single sentence. In my head, I saw Miles again, his smug grin at the dinner, the silence after the gala, the email trail, the Reddit post, the look he gave me before the verdict. I also remembered when we were kids, how he once punched a bully for calling me a suithead after I'd come home covered in ash. I remembered him bringing me ice cream after my first week in rehab, but memory is tricky. It offers kindness out of order and cruelty in full volume. Mateo was still watching me. His eyes weren't challenging. They were hopeful, like some part of him needed to know that even when family fails, people don't always. I reached out and adjusted the collar of his jacket. "I don't help people because they're family," I said slowly. "I help them when they're honest, when they want to change, when they don't use love as a debt." He blinked. "So, that's a maybe?" I smiled. "That's a maybe if you grow up and make good choices." He nodded, satisfied in the way only kids can be with half an answer that feels whole. As he walked back to the others, I felt something loosen in my spine. Maybe it was the years of silence. Maybe it was the way that one question cut deeper than any accusation. But mostly, I think it was the way he asked it, not to guilt me, not to trap me, just to understand. That night, when I got home, I opened the drawer with the old newspaper clipping and metal, and for the first time since the fire, I smiled without apology. That evening, the rain was soft, just enough to blur the city lights without drowning them. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd refinished myself after rehab, staring at a blinking cursor. No subject line yet, just the recipient. Miles Carter. I hadn't used his name aloud in months. I'd blocked his number, shredded the court documents, moved past the headlines. But something about that boy today, Mateo, had peeled open a part of me I thought was sealed shut. So, I started typing. "Miles." I paused. Not dear, not bro. Just Miles. There was a time when I would have given you anything. My money, my silence, my spine. I used to think loyalty meant folding yourself smaller so someone else could stand taller. You taught me that was wrong. The words came faster now. Not angry, not bitter, just clean. You broke more than trust. You tried to turn my name into a currency you could spend. But in doing so, you also forced me to look at who I was. Without you, without them, without applause. I stopped and read it over. No judgment, no venom. Just truth. So here's what I owe you. Thanks. Thank you for ruining my reputation. Thank you for trying to steal what I never meant to keep. Because in losing the version of myself that bent to survive you, I found the version that stood to become something better. I didn't sign it. I didn't send it. I just sat there, hands on the keyboard, watching the screen dim slightly as the system prompted me to save or delete. I chose neither. Instead, I got up and walked to the closet. From the back shelf, under a box of camping gear, I pulled it out. The old firefighter's cap, the brim scorched at one edge, the letters EC still barely visible inside the lining. It smelled faintly of smoke. Always had. And for a long time I'd kept it as proof. Proof that I was someone. That I'd mattered once. But today, I didn't need proof. I had faces of students, emails from school counselors, letters from parents who came back. A community that believed again. I stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had slowed to a mist. I placed the hat gently in the small metal burn bowl I kept for survival training demos. One match. Not for destruction. For closure. The fabric curled quickly. The brim folded inward. Smoke twisted upward, not in alarm, not in fear, just in release. I watched it burn, not as a symbol of what I'd lost, but of what I was no longer willing to carry. When the last ember died out, I sat back down. The draft email still sat open. I hovered over delete, clicked, then closed the laptop. Some things are better left unsent. Some truths are for you alone to know. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without hearing sirens in my dreams. It was a chilly Tuesday, the kind of morning where the grass stays wet until noon. Inside the Ashline Project's practice room, a dozen kids sat in a half circle around a fake stovetop, the kind we use for kitchen fire drills, just enough spark to teach, not to scare. I stood near the shelf of extinguishers, watching them take notes. Some leaned forward, eager. Some fidgeted, like fear made their hands restless. Then she raised her hand. A small girl, no more than 9. Freckles on both cheeks, and a pink barrette shaped like a strawberry. Her name was Raya. "Mr. Eli," she asked, voice just above a whisper. "Are you still afraid of fire?" The room went still. Even the kids who hadn't paid much attention suddenly looked my way. I didn't answer right away, because fear isn't something you can explain in bullet points. It lives in silence, in flinches. The way your breath shortens when the smoke alarm test goes off, even though you installed it yourself. I walked over to Raya. Kneeling, I took one of the practice fire extinguishers off the rack and placed it gently in her lap. It was almost half her size. She blinked, unsure. I placed my hand over hers, guiding it to the handle. "This," I said softly, "is control." Her eyes widened. I continued. "Fear is real. So is danger. But this?" I gave the handle a small squeeze. "This is how you remind yourself that you're not helpless." She looked at the extinguisher like it had just changed shape. Then, back at me. I smiled. Not the big kind people give to cameras. Just the kind that says, "I know what it's like." "Hold on to it," I said. "You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be ready." The boy next to her, older, with nervous energy in his knee, asked, "But were you ever scared? Like, really scared?" I stood up slowly, then pointed to the faded scar along my forearm. Every time. No one laughed, no one scoffed. They just nodded. Like, somehow, that made them feel safer. After class, Raya lingered. She didn't say anything, just slipped a folded napkin into my hand and ran back to her carpool. I opened it as I cleaned up the room. In thick marker letters, uneven, and a little smudged, it said, "Thank you for showing me that scared people can still be strong." I folded the napkin carefully, not because I needed to keep it, but because sometimes You save small flames to remind yourself what kept you warm. It came in a plain envelope, no return address. Just my name, handwritten, slanted slightly to the right, the kind of handwriting you remember from childhood notes on the fridge. I knew it was hers before I even opened it. My mother never called. She never wrote. For years, her silence was louder than any words she could have chosen. But now, a letter sat in my hands. The paper was ivory, heavy stock, the kind she used for church thank you notes and wedding RSVPs. It smelled faintly like lavender and the past. I unfolded it slowly. There were no greetings, no "Dear Eli," just a sentence, centered near the top. We don't see the light because our eyes are used to old fire. I read it again and again. There was something fragile about it, like the words had been written with the weight of too many unsaid apologies pressing down on the pen. She didn't try to explain, didn't say she misunderstood me, didn't blame her generation, her grief, or the fact that I didn't go to medical school like Miles. Just that line. And then, at the bottom, her name. Not Mom, not Mother, just Angela. For a moment, I stood in the middle of my apartment, not knowing what to do with the letter. My thumb brushed the edge, rough where the paper had torn from the notepad. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt acknowledged. And in my world, that was new. For years, I had been the quiet room at family gatherings, the blurry name in group texts, the "he teaches wilderness stuff" afterthought. But this letter, it didn't fix the years. It didn't rewind the hospital bed, the missed calls, the way she looked through me at the award ceremony. But it was something. A match in a dark hallway. I placed the letter inside an old fireproof box. Not because I wanted to protect it, but because I needed to remember it happened. Sometimes, when people finally see you, it's not because you shouted louder. It's because they finally turned around. The air smelled like pine and morning dew. A light haze hung low over the yard, rising off the training field like smoke without a source. I stepped outside with a clipboard in hand. The ash-lined center buzzed quietly. Sneakers scuffed across gravel. Walkie-talkies crackled. And someone shouted, "Time's up!" from the obstacle course. They didn't notice me at first, and for once I was okay with that. A group of kids, maybe 12 or 13, were practicing how to evacuate a room blindfolded. One bumped into a cone and muttered a curse under his breath. Another laughed so hard she dropped her flashlight. It was chaos. Beautiful, earnest chaos. And somehow, I felt steady in it. One of the instructors nodded at me from across the field. She had been a student of mine years ago, back when the most dangerous thing in her life was the cafeteria line. Now she taught others how to survive, how to breathe through fear. I leaned on the fence and watched. A younger boy, maybe 8, ran toward me with a toy fire extinguisher, way too big for his arms. "Mr. Eli, the kitchen's on fire again." I knelt down. "Then you know what to do, right?" He grinned, teeth still uneven, freckles across his nose like little burns from the sun. "Pull, aim, squeeze, sweep," he shouted, proud. "That's right," I said, gently tapping the side of the extinguisher. "You've got this." And just like that, he ran off again. Brave, a little reckless, alive. I stood there for a while longer, watching, listening, breathing, and then, without warning, without any real reason, I smiled. Not because someone called me a hero, not because a newspaper got my name right, not even because the lawsuit was over or the funding had cleared, but because for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. There was no fire to outrun, no uniform to wear, no spotlight to dodge. Just me, in this place, with these people, doing something that mattered. That day, I laughed with a group of kids learning CPR on dummies half their size. I handed out orange slices during break. I adjusted a helmet on a girl's head, who told me she wanted to be the first firefighter astronaut chef. And when the sun began to lower, casting long shadows over the yard, I sat on the steps of the center with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Somewhere behind me, a student played the harmonica badly. In front of me, life kept moving, unapologetically, beautifully forward. I didn't need fire anymore to feel alive. I just needed to stop running from the parts of me it hadn't burned.